I don't make very many movies now, but so when they do come along, the script has got to be special, and this was very special.
Oh, Marquis, this is Dr. Ray Kalar. He's joining us here in
an advisory capacity.
Welcome to our humble madhouse, Doctor. I trust you'll find yourself at home.
The project was sent to me by Fox Searchlight, and I was surprised and kind of amazed that a Hollywood studio would be thinking of doing a film in which the Marquis de Sade was a character.
I read the biography and was really compelled by this remarkable and extremist individual, and so a play started to germinate.
And then once I read the script and I read Doug Wright's approach to it, I just became enthralled.
Madame, how could you? Have you actually read this volume?
I've memorized it.
All the same stuff that's going on now was going on for, hundreds and hundreds of years, all in different ways, and that is what the Marquis is writing about. And maybe he was the first one to actually get it out there in the open.
Professor lifted column skirt high above her waist.
We oughtn't to be reading his nasty stories.
No one's forcing you to listen.
He's described in the play as being like a demented peacock, which is not mentioned in the screenplay, but I like that image a lot.
It's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So funny and yet so moving and so factual at the same time without being sort of in your face, a factual film.
It told me things that I'd never thought of about the Marquis de Sade, and it was also strangely funny.
Take this beast back to his cage. Don't tell me you've come to read my trousers. Oh, please don't keep me in suspense. What'll it be? 50 lashes? A night on the ram?
I came across an incident where the Marquis de Sade was interred at the Sharonton Asylum and writing such extreme pornography that they confiscated his parchment and his quill pens. And I thought that was the seed of a really great story.
Here he is in prison, everything taken away from him, except his imagination.
2 chapters, 1 for each cheek.
The writing is so gothic and wild. You don't want it to be cleaned in any way. You want it to be out there as racy as it is.
As a crowning gesture, we'll leave puddles of love on the Peruvian marble.
So many period things are very kind of prim and quite things are underplayed, whereas in this it's probably the most kind of realistic and truthful because it's all in there.
I think it's probably the best screenplay that I've ever read. You don't get that sense that it's a period drama. There's this kind of fable quality to it that I thought was unique.
He's written a piece that is almost like it's one of Sade's outrageous novels or one of his cheesier theatrical attempts.
Whereas the Marquis is a man in the extreme, the Abbé is a man of moderation.
They place the fruit on the belly of a bride and reap its juices when the young husband steers his vessel into port.
Usually, when you have 2 characters debating, it's very easy to take the sides of one character. Whereas in this, the story unfolds. I think that you're going to feel torn. It's from our own cellar. I recognize the taste.
I should have told you it was the blood of Christ. You'd believe that, wouldn't you?
He's trying for a world of peace and serenity, and if you will, a holy world. And the Marquis values the unholiness of things.
But I'm not a beautiful young prospect ripe for corruption.
Don't be so sure.
I think he's a sexy subject. I mean, he wrote about the basest aspects of ourselves and our most primitive appetites, and like it or not, we all share those things. And I think that's bound to intrigue people.
We don't want to deny them the possibility of belly laughing at some of the most dangerous ideas in the script, because he said that's what it's there for.
I think people are going to be surprised that it's actually quite subtle in that sort of sexual sense, and it's much more humorous in so many others.
Oh, bravo, Dauphin. It's far better to paint fires than to set them, isn't it?
Yes.
It was very interesting to me how, you know, how it really sort of shifts all the time, all the way through, and that it's so much about, you know, everyone in this asylum and not just about him.
To be able to attract actors of that caliber who want to bite into the material with zeal and perform it suggests that it's the kind of movie that a lot of people will find intriguing.
Not only was I lucky to find the four principal actors, but there were all the smaller characters, all these marvelous actors who filled out and created, within the context of the piece, you know, full-blown characters.
We have a lot of people who've come from a disabled actors theatre company. I mean, it's a real inspiration, actually, to watch these people work.
He's an actor's director, but if you look at the way he comes at a scene and his logic behind it, if you speak to him, I mean, he's not just set it up because the scenery's lit. You know, if you talk to him, you say, why are you doing this? And he'll give you 10 minutes on why he's doing it. It's quite amazing. He's a great director, I think.
Doug Wright, the writer, is here with us all the time too, and that's incredibly helpful because sometimes there are so many sections that are almost, they're intellectual to the point of being similar to Shakespeare.
Suppose one of your precious inmates attempted to walk on water and drowned. Would you condemn the Bible? I think not.
We're still having the same debates now that they were having then about sexuality and religion and politics.
Well, this monstrous God of yours, he strung up his very own son like a side of veal. I shudder to think what he'd do to me.
Questions about whether art can incite us to acts of violence or whether it can warp fragile psychology. So I think that the questions Sade poses couldn't be more germane to the age that we're living in.
Looking back on the period, it was such a period of change. It became very exciting to costume this.
67, take 2. Action!
I talked extensively with Phil about the piece after he'd given me the script, and he particularly didn't want a costume drama. It's not Philip Kaufman. He really wanted characters from the time, and he wanted the characters to be approached from the inside out.
Jacqueline West, who I'd worked with on some other movies, who I refer to as my secret weapon. She's, you know, really an integral part of the entire film.
He really believes in crafting the characters, and he understands the importance of wardrobe in telling a story. It was such an interesting period for style because there was such radical change. Napoleon and Josephine actually were counseled to come up with ways that would simplify style. The Empire period is very clean and goes back to Greco-Roman style.
As for the author, shoot him.
When I first started talking about Michael Caine's character with Phil, we decided it should progress from a doctor, thinking that he was doing everything in the name of right.
Do more, or I shall be forced to inform the ministry that the inmates are indeed running the asylum.
He would, you know, be approachable, and his character would progress to this dark, ominous, almost Darth Vader kind of character going through the halls of Charenton and the capes.
My, at Charenton, even the walls have eyes.
Don't they?
He would become really ominous and ugly and evil. He gave me the biggest compliment because he said once he put on this wardrobe, he didn't have to act anymore. He was Roy Collard. So that was about the best compliment a costume designer can get. He was wonderful to work with.
Yeah, you'll see.
She's most difficult.
I'm a nightmare.
It's been the biggest pleasure putting Kate into this corset, I have to say.
And it hasn't been the biggest pleasure for me.
I started researching what servants of that period wore, and they really wore the discards of the rich from the Revolution. So I realized her wardrobe would come probably from donations from the church and through the abbey found their way to the asylum, and that she would be dressing out of these discards. At one point I gave her a picture of an actual laundress from the period, which she took home and put up on her mirror and would look at every morning before she'd come to the set.
Although I've done lots and lots of period films, I haven't ever done this period in France, and certainly not working class. So that was really what I was getting my head around, and you know, how they would have lived their day-to-day lives, women who were in employment, what type of lives they would have led, how much money they would have been paid. And what I really should be thinking about here is what the working classes were like.
I didn't want to give her a mop cap like a servant girl. I thought it would be too cliche, especially for Kate, and thinking this was an individualistic, free-thinking young woman, that she would do something different. Simone was really fun to costume because she had so many changes. She was a young girl of the period. She starts out in a convent, and she evolves to a really young seductress.
Quickly, and you can ravish me again. I don't know, I always feel very sorry for Simone when it comes to that, because she's kind of trapped in this life that she doesn't know how to live. And then she reads this book, and it just frees her completely.
She goes from a very demure, sweet young girl to a look of a much more worldly young woman. So that was the evolution of the look of Simone.
My newest book. It starts at my left cuff and continues right across my back. The longest sentence you'll notice runs the entire length of my inseam.
It was challenging making Geoffrey's Marquis de Sade suit with the writing all over it. We worked for many, many days on this. First of all, we reproduced the writing of the Marquis de Sade, and we wrote it all out in its entirety, and then cut it up on paper and pasted it on the toile. And sat there and looked at it and talked about it, and wondered where we would run the script down his leg as opposed to around his leg, and when it would go across his back, and what we would put on his cuff, and where would Kate look at it and really start reading. And we just put ourselves in his mind.
2 chapters, 1 for each cheek.
And it was a great collaboration with my design assistant, Michael O'Connor, and Jane Clive.
You're a man of science, not a man of God. Charenton stands to profit from us both, I'm certain.
Well, Joaquin's wardrobe seems like the simplest because he was a priest and it was confined to a cassock, but when we got down to his shoes, it was a bit problematic. Joaquin's a vegan and clogs were traditionally of leather, so we made them of pleather, so we tried to accommodate him. As the story progresses, his wardrobe becomes more opened and more disheveled and less controlled as he starts losing control of his authority at the asylum.
The moment you put it on, you walk on set and the candles are burning and all the extras and the costumes and the lighting, you absolutely feel a part of this world. And of course that's of great help.
So I started approaching each character from the inside out, thinking about what makes them do what they do within the script. And at that point, the characters start to just dress themselves.
It was clear from reading it that it wasn't going to be a documentary about the Marquis de Sade. It wasn't going to be a biography. It was going to be a film in which he appeared as a character and as a sort of driving force. I always had this image in my head of having a curved corridor from which Madeleine would be standing here, and you'd be able to sort of get a tantalizing glimpse down a succession of arches. And you'd be able to glimpse a sort of little crack in the door, beyond which you'd desperately want to go to find out what was going on beyond it. At the same time, not want to go because it's too frightening. The screenplay has dictated the way all of these rooms link together, and they need to link together in a particular way.
Are you ready? Okay. Is that you? Oh, for fuck's sake, who else would it be?
You begin to realise what a superbly crafted screenplay it is when you start trying to work out how to plot the rooms and how they all relate to one another. So this is sort of the plot in model form. I think this is pretty much 99.9% how I imagined it was going to be. It's probably even better. When this sort of thing goes from model to drawing board, there's not a great deal happens architecturally. There's a lot that happens to the details, so little details get added, and things, once you start to construct them, present themselves. It's a fairly extraordinary story that doesn't stick to history.
Mesdames et messieurs.
And so that gives you a certain amount of license to create a world which could possibly have existed in 1810, but at the same time create a world in which people will believe this story will have happened.
I think as actors, well, I'll speak for myself, I certainly feel that the sets are amazing, the design and the lighting, and you certainly feel a part of this world and of that period. St. Augustine tells us that angels and demons walk among us on the earth, and that sometimes they jointly inhabit the soul of a single man.
Then how can we know who is truly good and who is evil?
Well, we can't.
It's a hospital that has to change during the course of the film because it's a sort of lovely, idealistic place under Coulmier, Joaquin Phoenix, and it eventually takes on a very, very dark tone towards the end under Royer Collard. This is something that in the script is referred to as the calming chair, which I think sort of does anything but.
Stop, I beg you!
There would have been people in this lunatic asylum who seriously did have deformed limbs or couldn't walk properly or spoke in a funny way and genuinely had disabilities, but of course then they would have been seen as lunatics because no one knew about what these illnesses were.
The way Royer Collard sees it, you're in an asylum, you're one of God's little mistakes, and he figures that 50 lashes of the whip helps you to become more correct.
We constantly use the word correction rather than torture, and there is a tendency for this kind of set to possibly look like a torture chamber. I'll be excited to know whether any changes that we make to the throbbing heart of Charenton, whether that comes across. As you go from the beginning of the film to the end of the film. I mean, that's it put very, very simply, but obviously it's done with tremendous artistry and subtlety.